millennials, young people under the age of, say, 30 years, are ideally positioned to assume and learn the skills that can start to dismantle fear and distrust.
Hi, everyone, and hi to Scilla. Welcome to the One Young World Together Apart series. My name is Fritz Lensch. I'm an impact facilitator and social artist reinventing leadership, and also the founder of G20 and Neonseeds. Plus, I'm a development consultant to the Business Plan for Peace, an organization recently founded by Dr. Scilla Elworthy. Welcome, Scilla.
Thank you.
As a 3 times Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Scilla has transformed policy and action and conflict prevention by founding Oxford Research Group. She's now the founder of Peace Direct, which funds and promotes and learns from local peace builders in conflict areas, and has recently founded the Business Plan for Peace to build a world without war. Scilla, in the wake of the pandemic, you've released a book, or a booklet, should I say, The Mighty Heart, which I've probably read now 5 times. A guidebook on how to transform conflict, obviously super relevant in this time. So I just want to thank you, first of all, for joining and ask you to tell us a little bit about the Mighty Heart and what it is.
Well, I had a premonition soon after Christmas, not knowing anything about any pandemic, that we were very shortly going to need every single skill we know that works to prevent and resolve conflict. So I simply sat down and it poured out onto the page, assembling everything that I've learned from other people in conflict areas, everything, stories of what people have done and how they work and so on. So it's very practical. And the issues we cover are, first of all the skills we need in conflict situations. How do we transform a conflict? How do we hold a courageous conversation? How do we engage feminine intelligence? Because that's a key, listening is a key ingredient to resolving conflict. And how do we tame our inner critic? Because our inner critic often niggles away at us and actually ruins our capacity to really be present and available for conflict transformation. So, and we also talk about how do you meet your shadow and how do you build this mighty heart. And that covers things like what breaks your heart and how it is to be in service to this world we're now moving into that needs people like One Young World members so very badly.
Brilliant. And when I present the Mighty Heart to my friends, I always say it's practicable wisdom, which you don't get very often in a book. So it's really exercise that people can directly dive into and practice, which is amazing. So to let you know, Scilla, we have crowdsourced questions from the One Young World ambassador community. And there's the first question, which really well works together with what you shared about the Mighty Heart, from Priya from India. And she asks, what do you think are the most prevalent obstacles to peace today? And what change needs to take place in order to overcome them?
Wow, what a question. How to answer that in 2 minutes. First of all, I would say that the key obstacles are the huge availability of weaponry. The amounts of money that are made by people who make weapons, trading on insecurities and particularly locally led aggression and aggressivity. So we need to stop that trade. We need to stop that production. We also need to take away, to the extent that we can, the investment in that production of weapons. We also find that the big obstacle that most people face is a lack of communication within their communities. In other words, that people simply aren't listening to each other, that people are riding their particular passions to the extreme without being able to even contemplate what that means for other people. So empathy and empathic listening becomes vitally important, and the courage to face an issue as it's exploding into armed violence. And what many of the people we work with in hot conflict areas are skilled in doing is being able to face armed violence, acute violence, the sharp end, without fear. And to do that, we find that most of them who are most successful at it are those who have done what we would call the inner work, which means having a daily practice of some kind of self-reflection, meditation, yoga, walking in nature, anything that enables you to go really deeply within yourself. That is a key training in being able to stop violence in its tracks. And it applies whether or not you live in an inner city in Britain or the United States, or whether you are in a very fragile state.
Amazing. And the inner work applies to everything in life, doesn't it? So to do that both feeds into developing a peaceful world, but as well, everything else that is the benefit of being alive. And actually, the next question from Kimoy from Jamaica really feeds into that in terms of the qualities needed to create peace. So he asks, developing countries like mine struggle with high levels of crime and violence, Jamaica. This effect usually stems from the chronic and persistent breakdown in the family. In many instances, schools and teachers have to step in and become a proxy to the family structure. In what ways can schools be adjusted or repurposed in developing countries to reduce the impact of the failed family system and to help in the long term to fight against crime and violence?
What a great question, Kamoi. This is so much on the button for what's happening all over the world. I'm sure that if schools and teachers could all take a short course in something called nonviolent communication, NVC. It's a simple technique to learn, and it involves being able to move through 4 stages with somebody with whom you are in conflict. So once teachers have absorbed the skill, which may just take them a day to learn, and they can share it with their students, and the students then teach their parents. So it has a knock-on effect. And the learning of this, this particular technique has proved so incredibly effective that, for example, young kids in Israel-Palestine, in the Israel-Palestine conflict, were taught on both sides by their teachers how to take on this this skill. And it ended up with young kids aged 6 actually having the skills to stop playground bullying. So just at that very, very young level, people can learn these skills and then, as I say, teach them to their elders. And that's just one of many skills that we mention in the booklet.
And as I told you before, I have done my first nonviolent communication course when I was 10. And I remember feeling I felt, I said, ridiculous to do this work. But then I always used it until today and will always continue to use it. So such brilliant fundamental work, really.
It's a skill you have for life, isn't it, Fritz?
It really is. It really is. So Veronica asked the next question. She says, as an Eritrean, she wants to understand how to rebuild trust in communities that have endured decades marked with fear and distrust. Maybe actually, she has a sub-question to that, but maybe let's go into that first and then we can go into the sub-question afterwards.
No, she's facing a really deep issue, because when trust has been lost in communities, as we know, there's just suspicion builds, and it can build right up to massacres, as we know, as we saw that happened in Rwanda. So you've endured in Eritrea decades marked with fear and distrust. And again, I would say that millennials, young people under the age of, say, 30 years, are ideally positioned to assume and learn the skills that can start to dismantle fear and distrust. And this means building small cohorts of people who accept the same values and the same norms, to work with them to build a shared value system, which would obviously include ways of dismantling fear. Once that's happened, to actually include in that group people from the other side, those with whom you fundamentally disagree or with whom your community fundamentally distrusts, and bring them into the kind of learning that you're doing with your peers. Extend a hand, say we're trying to learn skills that are going to serve our area, our region in the future, to build a community feeling in which we can all, for example, study peacefully and safely. We want to do that. We'd like you to join us in doing it. Would you be willing? That's the key question for so much of this peace building, is this wonderful question, would you be willing? And for example, if there's if you're starting with an issue between you and a family member, and you can say to that family member, would you be willing to sit down with me for half an hour? For the first 5 minutes, I will ask you to speak in the first person about your feelings about our disagreement. And I will listen to you, not interrupt you. And when you finish speaking, I will feed back to you everything I heard you say. And if possible, how I think you're feeling. Then we'll change over. And I will speak for 5 minutes, again, not pointing finger, in the first person, and ask you to listen to me so carefully that you can feed back to me what you heard. And I can guarantee that after these 2 short periods, you will both be able to move from the mind that says, I'm right and you're wrong, to the heart that says, oh my God, is that how she feels? And then you've got a bridge over which you can begin to meet. I hope that could help you.
The amounts of times that I've done this exercise with you, Scilla, is incredible. And every time it is powerful again to really listen deeply and reflect back. And I remember actually back at One Young World, you've asked ambassadors to build little peace councils of young people to come together and reach out to the party that the country is in conflict with. So that was, I saw that in practice, and it's quite incredible. So maybe to move a little bit to the second part of that question, she also asked, Veronica, how can societies work to repair their social fabric when their regimes crush any form of denunciation? And it reminds me of the Architectures for Peace, but also general the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. What Nelson Mandela did when he came out of jail in 1989, he knew there was a huge risk of civil war. And so he set up what's called an architecture for peace, from national to village level councils of trusted people, sports personalities trusted locally, the head of the midwives, the head of the fire brigade, the head teachers, media personalities, put them all together on a council, and their job is to build a peace plan for that area, that village, that town. And then when violence erupts, to put that plan into action. So that's a way of repairing and making stronger the social fabric that Veronica's mentioning. When regimes crush any form of denunciation, well, what we need to do in a very authoritarian regime, obviously, is work underground to build trust. You can't yet risk doing that in public if there's that kind of threat. And so what was done, for example, in Eastern Europe before the Iron Curtain came down was incredibly valuable, because as soon as there was even a degree of freedom, people had trained each other and managed to agree with each other, even across ideological divides, in such a way that they built nuggets that I would call them, of trust. And that's the way to defeat the kind of divide and rule that any autocratic ruler wants to impose, because it makes power easier to hold in his or her hands.
And maybe we can send some of the instructions for the architectures for peace and the descriptions from Nelson Mandela out to the One Young World's ambassador community.
That would be great. We can certainly do that.
Brilliant. I have another question that is very relevant to this time right now, and a topic that I'm deeply touched by, the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd was killed in the US. So Alicia from the US wants to know, how can your insight on conflict prevention, violent conflict prevention, be applied to the deep-rooted culture of police brutality we see now in the US?
Oof, what a tough one, because there's so much anger. And the first thing I would try to do is to get your representatives locally or in your state to get the training of the police changed. Because as I understand it, police training includes, I think, 85 to 90% training in fighting and quelling riots, and only something like 10 to 15% of training in communication and working well with crowds. So I think that's the first place to start, to try to get the training. Everything I read says that there's a huge build-up of pressure to get police training changed. So you'll be on a good rising tide of opinion that says that has to happen. But as I understand it, police training varies from state to state and maybe even region to region. So what you can do as young people is go to whichever is the relevant authority and say, what percentage of our police training is in crushing riots and in fighting? Police are trained to fight. And what a proportion is in actually building communication and trust with the public. And we want to see that changed and reversed. And you would be on a very, very rising tide of opinion to do that.
I guess that kind of links back actually to the training that you mentioned about in schools, right? To train the nonviolent communication skills and some of the other skills that are in the mighty heart, also needed in the police training, right?
Yeah. By the way, the nonviolent communication training is known as NVC, and if you just Google NVC, you'll find it. But in the e-version, which you can access, of our booklet, you can also find the links and how to even learn a bit of it from there.
Wonderful. And one other thing actually that just comes to mind is also the investment into arms in the police in the US. There's a very high investment in actual weaponry for the police in the US, which I guess that can be written to the representative in your state in the US to also reinvest and disinvest from weaponry, which I know is one of the other initiatives of the Business Plan for Peace.
Definitely, that's important. And shift the proportion of the police budget that goes into A, weaponry, and B, those terrifying outfits that they put on. And ask them not, except in absolutely extreme riot situations, but not to treat an ordinary peaceful crowd like something that the SAS, the most militarized wing of our armies, deal with it. The police look terrifying in the cuts that I've seen, and it's very important that they are not seen as aggressors and thugs when they're that's what they're supposedly trying to deal with.
Thank you. And then we have a final question that's shifting the topic a little bit to Brazil, which obviously is a country that right now is also in deep conflict. And it comes from a leader in Brazil who asks, businesses are now more than ever taking a public stance on the issues affecting their employees and consumers. But it's not common for them to fixate on peace or issues related to violent conflict. How can we get the business community to truly understand the role they play in addressing violent conflict? And I know that is your question, bang on. Business Plan for Peace.
Well, what a great question. All these questions are fantastic. Thank you for this one. Businesses can play and are beginning to play a really significant role in addressing conflict. One is to put into place through their HR departments, their human resources department, courses available, first of all, voluntary courses, and then they'll become very popular in the kind of skills we put forward in the Mighty Heart, so that more of their employees are actually convinced of the power and the efficiency of their employees learning how to be nonviolent, and not just to be nonviolent, but actually to become really good communicators. I worked for 6 years for the leading luxury goods company in the world to enable them to build what they called active and conscious leadership. You could Google it if you wanted to. And that meant starting with the global presidents. And there were 26 global presidents. And guess what was the first thing I had to teach them to do? Listen. They all thought they were perfect listeners. And then I tested that with them in public. And they really were not good at listening at all. So the first day I spent putting them through exercises to learn to listen to each other. And in the end, they said, what you taught us enabled us to resolve in 15 minutes what would have taken 4 hours of argument and still not been resolved. So if businesses, if you work for a business that has, as most businesses do, a lot of conflict going on inside it, put these ideas forward, buy a copy, the book copy of the business plan, of the, I beg your pardon, of the Mighty Heart, and really show it to them, explain to them why it's so important. And we're shortly, I hope, with Fritz's help, we're going to be bringing out an online course to teach it, and we'll make that available to you as soon as we can.
And I guess that brings us full circle, actually, when we talk about the listening skill that is so dominant in the Mighty Heart and also so important for the business community and really any community. You talk about schools, business. So I first want to thank everybody that sent us these beautiful questions. Scilla and I really wanted to crowdsource questions and hear what people are curious about and what people need help with. So thanks to all that send us these questions, and special thanks to you, Scilla, for your time and your insight and your wisdom that you share with the world.
That's a pleasure. And I'm thrilled to be once again in contact with One Young World, having been at your conference last September, was it, Fritz? I think Fritz introduced me then. And I really hope next time it's possible to have a physical meeting that I can be there and have further conversations with you.
Thank you, Scilla.
Thanks so much.